10 to 13 Celsius, but in sheltered rural spots in the single figures, and 3 to 6 Celsius possible for parts of Scotland first thing, 1 or 2 fog patches for Wales and the southwest. Otherwise, a bright start for many. Quite quickly through the morning, the shower clouds will build once again, and those showers will be hit and miss into the afternoon. I think fewer compared with today, but actually still quite a number about, and they'll once again be heaviest in the east, drier towards the west and into the start of Friday. Well, a similar start to the day. Bright on the cool side, but largely dry before those showers develop into the morning, and an outlook that is remaining unsettled. Bands of rain crossing the country on Saturday, clearing to showers on Sunday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 6 o'clock, it's Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, this evening. Now, as you've probably heard by now, Nigel Farage has had his bank account closed because of his political views, not because he didn't have enough money. So why are companies making moral judgments on their customers? Environmental, social and corporate governance. That's why we're going to be discussing that. What does it mean for you? And what's the point of Labour? Is there even a left and a right anymore? Do those terms have any relevance in 2023? Or are both of our major parties basically the same? Also, are rural communities being left behind? Get in touch with me this evening if you do live in the countryside and you're one of the people whose bus routes have been cut by a quarter in less than 10 years. And also, let's talk about apprenticeships. We hear the government discuss them a lot, especially this week. But why aren't we investing in apprenticeships and still insisting that kids go to university? All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly Middleton.
Middlehurst, Bev, but it's OK. Yeah, let's bring you the latest news. Now, as you've been hearing, the top story today, the Prime Minister says no one should have their bank account closed for exercising their right to free speech. The matter was raised in PMQs by David Davis, who described the closure of GB News presenter Nigel Farage's bank account by the exclusive bank Coutts as vindictive, irresponsible and undemocratic. Rishi Sunak was asked if the government would need UK banks to inform the Treasury about all the accounts they've closed for non-commercial reasons over the last decade. Rishi Sunak told MPs the rules are being reviewed. Meanwhile, he was forced to leave Parliament today by the back door because of a demonstration by Just Stop Oil. Trying to stop MPs from attending PMQs, police made dozens of arrests. Well, the other top story on GB News today, Tata, the owner of Jaguar Land Rover, is set to create 4,000 new jobs in the UK through a new electric car battery factory. The £4 billion gigafactory, as it's going to be known, is expected to be built in Somerset. The Prime Minister said it'll also lead to thousands more jobs in the supply chain, although it's understood the factory will be backed by significant subsidies from the government amounting to hundreds of millions of pounds. He added it wasn't just taxpayers' money that enticed Tata to invest in the UK.
When I was Chancellor, I set up something called the Automotive Transformation Fund, which was always there to provide targeted investment in strategic industries where we thought it would make sense. But what is crucial about an investment like this is it's not just going to be about that. It's going to be, as I said, about the quality of the workforce that we have here, the quality of our infrastructure, the road and rail connections, the approach to regulation, the competitiveness of our tax regime, which we have changed to make it more attractive for businesses to invest.
Inflation has fallen today, but the Chancellor says the government isn't complacent about the current cost of living, and he says he understands people are worried about rising costs. Jeremy Hunt was responding to the latest inflation figures, which have fallen faster than expected in the year to June. Inflation now stands at 7.9%. Last month, it was 8.7%. The Office for National Statistics says the fall may ease pressure on the Bank of England, which had been expected to raise interest rates next month. Rail passengers are set to face disruption tomorrow as train drivers continue their long-running dispute over pay. Members of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union will strike on the 20th, 22nd and 29th of July, while drivers in ASLEF are banning overtime this week. The industrial action at 14 train companies will see trains starting later and finishing much earlier than usual. In some areas, around half of train services will run. Others will have no services at all. Scotland's outgoing Chief Constable says the investigation into the SNP's finances has now moved beyond initial allegations concerning fraud. Sir Ian Livingstone has told the BBC that Operation Branchform had expanded its remit to examine potential embezzlement and the misuse of funds since being launched 2 years ago. It followed allegations that £600,000 raised originally for campaigning in support of Scottish independence had been diverted elsewhere. Rishi Sunak today apologised to LGBT veterans for their horrific treatment within the armed forces in the past because of a previous ban on homosexuality in the military. It follows an independent review which found that from 1967 until the year 2000, a culture of homophobia, bullying, blackmail and sexual assault existed within the armed forces, which led to some personnel taking their own lives. Lord Etherton's report has called for survivors to be paid compensation, which could cost the government up to £50 million. A man's been jailed for 12 years after admitting causing the death by dangerous driving of a pregnant mother of two. Frankie Jules Howe, who was 38, died in May after her car was hit by Adil Iqbal, who was travelling at 123 miles an hour on the M66 in Bury in Greater Manchester. Frankie's 9-year-old son and 4-year-old nephew were seriously injured in the incident. And lastly, to the United States, where the former President Donald Trump has lost his bid for a new trial after the verdict that found him liable for sexually abusing and defaming a celebrated writer. E. Jean Carroll won the lawsuit and was awarded more than £3.8 million in damages. Trump had argued awarding her more than £1.5 million in compensatory damages for sexual assault was excessive because the jury found he'd not raped her and the defamation was based on pure speculation. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, the People's Channel.
Let me start with an apology to Polly Middlehurst, who isn't Polly Middleton, but of course Polly's never normally on in the mornings when I am. Sorry, got that wrong. Right, beautifully read, Polly, as always. What would you do without you? Now, joining me on the panel this evening, journalist and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubney and co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Good to see you both, gentlemen. You need to get in touch at home as well. GBViews at gbnews.com is the email, or on Twitter at GBNews. Right, top story this evening. Nigel Farage's bank account. Now, no doubt you're aware of this by now. He was all over the front page of the Daily Telegraph, this story today. His account was closed at Coutts because of his political beliefs. In a report by Coutts Bank, it said the committee found that it did not think continuing to bank with Nigel Farage was compatible with Coutts, given his publicly stated views that were at odds with our position as an inclusive organisation. Now, I think this is really shocking, actually, this story. And it all stems from this idea that we have environmental social governance rules, or ESGs, which form a large part, actually, of any corporation now, even small businesses. And it's the idea that the business has a moral compass, that they are the arbiters of what is and is not acceptable to say, to do, frankly, to think. So why are corporations taking these moral judgments on customers? Martin, let me start with you. What was your reaction when you heard that Coutts stopping Nigel's account wasn't because he didn't have enough money? They did try to say that for a little while. That was clearly a lie. It's because they don't like him.
Yeah, first of all, they said it was because of his financial situation. Then it was because he was a politically exposed person. Both of those were baseless lies. It's actually not social credit. This is moral credit. Yeah. This is financial institutions not approving of what you stand for and withdrawing finance. They put themselves above the state, above law in that sense, and they are making these choices based on this made-up concoction of inclusivity. It's so inclusive, isn't it, to kick customers out? That's the opposite of being inclusive. Now, we've had this kind of woke washing of capitalism for a long time now. We see it with all the big corporations, but we were able to cancel them if we didn't agree with them. Like if you see pride flags festooned everywhere in your local supermarket, you just don't go to them. If you find like Ben & Jerry's say, well, let's bring more refugees, and just don't buy their overpriced, fat, clogged ice cream. But this is corporations cancelling individuals. And Nigel, I think, has done the right thing by speaking out, because it's not just Nigel. Yeah. We've seen like trans parents groups, Our Future, thousands of parents who are concerned about transitioning in secret. A perfectly legitimate and valid concern, which is to be mandated in law by Kemi Badenoch today, having their accounts closed. Metro Bank cancelled Lawrence Fox. The Reclaim Party, when I went there, it was impossible to bank. And we saw this with Justin Trudeau, with the truckers in Canada. You're breaking a blockade on the vaccine, therefore, poof, we're just going to cut you off. You can't even finance yourself. So I think Nigel has been fantastic by speaking out, because this is an insidious trend we must stop. First, it's the leaders. Next, it'll be all of us.
But you see, of course, they would say, the bank would say, we are a private corporation. We are entitled to provide our services to people, anybody that we like. Who are you if you believe in the free market and you believe in capitalism? Who are you to say we should have this customer, we don't want this customer?
Yeah, but then, as we've seen with Nigel, there's been 10 more banks. And so in the end, your credit rating is obliterated. And if you have the inability to bank, then you have the inability to function, to exist, to trade, to be a human, to be a free person. And I think, this Stasi-like mentality of, let's face it, banks are hardly,
the arbiters of pure morality.
Exactly. I think that's what this is all about. They're trying to make themselves out to be the good guys. They're anything but the good guys.
Yeah. Aaron, what do you make of it? Do they have a right as a bank to say, we want this customer, we don't want this customer because we don't like him? I mean, that is basically what they're saying. We don't want to be, it was something about we don't want to be banking, we don't want, Nigel Farage banking with us will reflect poorly on the business. Do they have a right to say that?
Absolutely not. It's like saying, can a landlord say to somebody, well, on the basis of your political views, I will not allow you to be my tenant? That is clearly discrimination on the basis of consciousness. And I think we have a really interesting microcosm here of a real big problem, which is diversity in this country means I will embrace who you are, white, brown, black, gay, straight, man, woman, non-binary, doesn't matter, as long as you think what I think.
Yeah.
But the second we talk about diversity of thought, plurality of opinion, then the diversity stuff goes out of the window. And by the way, that matters as well for brown and black people, because they're more than tolerated in public space, but the second you deviate from the official narrative on things, you're in big trouble. There was Rupert Huck's comment about Kwasi Kwarteng. He can't really be black, he's a Conservative.
That's right. Just Labour MP.
That's right. An astonishing thing to say. So a few quick points. The fact this happened is astonishing. It's unacceptable. The fact they seemingly lied to the BBC in a private briefing. The fact that the BBC then uncritically published that. This is all alleged, but I need to make those caveats. This story is explosive, and I would say to people who are on the left, don't ignore that just because it's Nigel Farage.
Well, they haven't just ignored it, they've actually signal boosted it and jumped on board in the pylons.
And applauded it.
Yeah, so people like Paul Mason, the sort of darling of the left, used to work for the BBC, former Labour Party parliamentary candidate, actually sticking up for Coots. This bank where you have to have £1 million to get in. This guy called himself a socialist, and he's purely taken that political viewpoint because he doesn't like Nigel Farage. And listen, mate, they're coming for Nigel first, it'll be Corbyn next. It could be anybody, and that's the point. We should forget about our politics and look at the principle. If you have your life shut down by an institution because of your political beliefs, it won't stop with Nigel. It could go anywhere.
The thing is, and that's why I want to make this, I want us to focus on this concept of ESG and what that means for businesses. So ESG is it is a criteria, basically, that has insidiously seeped into business. These are the 3 pillars of ESG. If you run a business, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because the idea that you have to practice in a way that is environmentally sound, so you have to reduce your carbon use, you have to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, etc. Can you just put that graphic back up again for a minute, please? And also, the idea that you have to have a social responsibility. So this is OK. We're all right with a lot of this. Employee benefits, workplace health and safety, adhering to labour laws. I think we would all agree those sorts of expectations have made the workplace safer for most people. And then you get onto this idea of governance. Ethical business practices, avoiding conflicts of interest, perhaps, accounting integrity. But ethical business practices, whose ethics, Martin? Because when you say then about it will come for the left, the ethics which are often inculcated within these environmental social governance documents are incredibly left-leaning.
Yeah, when you look at, was it 86 times it mentioned Brexit?
That's right.
And let's face it, 17.4 million people, the majority of Britain, agrees with Nigel Farage on Brexit. And they will be on, the same watch list. Yeah. These are mainstream beliefs. Supporting Djokovic. He was in the Wimbledon final on Sunday. He almost won. The greatest living tennis player who took a principled stand to not take the vaccine. Yeah. And that's he's entitled to do that.
And that is in the dossier. It was a dossier on Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
This is what Coutts had produced, and this is what Nigel was able to access from a subject access request. So who decides, Aaron? That's the idea, isn't it? I think it's so clever, this move, this global movement towards we've all got to think the same way, and it has infiltrated the businesses, and that's why these companies are taking decisions like this.
And it's bad for society as well. Again, even if you don't like Nigel Farage, because we can only have good ideas by having bad ones first. That might sound a bit strange, but Martin might have a policy. I say, Martin, you're wrong about that policy. Here's why. Martin might then be persuaded. He said, have you thought about this? And we can arrive at something which is actually a sensible way of administering a certain area of public life. So this idea of wrongthink, I mean, it's remarkably similar to the kinds of obsession you got with heresy in medieval Europe. You've broken the sacrosanct scriptures, therefore your opinions don't matter. That's a very big backward step from where we've been as a society, frankly, for more than a century.
Yeah. What should Nigel do now, do you think, Martin?
Well, he's done the right thing by just shining a massive spotlight, and they are naked in public now, Coutts.
Yeah.
They have to answer. The dossier was leaked to the Mail. It's like it's out there, and if they had any form of crisis management, then they would have seen this come in. Was Nigel ever going to take this lying down?
I mean,
was he ever going to keep quiet about it?
They picked the wrong person, didn't they?
Precisely.
I mean, it made House of Commons today, this, in PMQs. I think we might have a clip, actually, of Rishi Sunak talking about it. We had Suella Braverman tweeted about it to say that it was outrageous, that his bank account had been stopped. Let's just see if we got this clip of...
It wouldn't be right if financial services were being denied to anyone exercising their right to lawful free speech. Our new Financial Services and Markets Act puts in place new measures to ensure that politically exposed persons are being treated in an appropriate and proportionate manner. And having consulted on the payment services regulations, we are in the process of cracking down on this practice by tightening the rules around account closures.
Rishi Sunak there was responding to a question by David Davis.
Yeah.
David Davis said the name Nigel Farage. Rishi Sunak, of course, didn't say Nigel Farage. He didn't go far enough, Aaron. He's still saying it's about being a politically exposed person.
Look, I'm not a Conservative voter. Just so your audience know, I would probably never vote Conservative. But I find it remarkable, after 13 years of Conservative government, banks can do this to people on the basis of Brexit. I find it absolutely incredible. Obviously, political parties are meant to govern for everyone. That's the ideal. They can't even do it for people that vote for them. I am perplexed. And one more thing, NatWest is owned 38% by the taxpayer.
That's right.
Yep.
So the idea that...
own Coutts.
Yeah, and the idea that this bank, of all the banks, can debank British subjects is mind-boggling.
But the next big conversation, I think, is the diversity industry. It's a racket. It's got its tentacles all over public bodies. It's got its tentacles all over private enterprises. Now our banks, they're coming up with an arbitrary set of rules where they decide in private who's worthy and who's a heathen.
Yeah.
And they're kicked out on the basis of what? And we've got organisations like Stonewall and Mermaids. Next it'll be climate change. No doubt they've got all the details about what they said on lockdowns, on Black Lives Matter. It's a Stasi-style dossier decided in private, and people are excommunicated with no payback. I'm so glad Nigel's gone up the ladder on this one.
I don't believe that everybody that sat in the room reading or coming up with that dossier agreed with what was being done, but why are people too cowardly now?
Because they want to keep quiet.
This isn't right.
They hope that they'll be the last to be fed to the crocodile. And that's what this industry is. It's a crocodile that devours. And it wants power, it wants money, it wants control, and it wants excommunication. And they've just picked on the wrong target.
Yeah, well, he's blown it wide apart, and all credit to him. Because the other thing that I think that comes out of this, Aaron, just briefly before we go to the break, is Coutts doing this have shown how they feel about the British public. Nigel Farage may not be popular with MPs in the House of Commons. He's popular with the British public. And so, in other words, Coutts don't like them either.
No, even if you only think, say, 20% of the British public like Nigel Farage, you're still talking, in excess of, 10 million people. And the thing that really gets me is this is a huge multinational. The communications aspect of it, of course he could do a subject access request. He can do a subject access request with anything that has his name on it within the company. Such a huge business making such a schoolboy error, shocking.
I think, Andrew, it was 52% like Nigel. Let's just be straight. Yeah.
Right, thanks, guys. Now, coming up next, what is the point of Labour? And are Labour and Tories basically the same? Do the old references of left and right even mean anything in politics anymore? This is GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. It's Bev Turner in for Michelle this evening while she's on holiday with Dewbs & Co. Keeping me company tonight until 7 o'clock is journalist and former Brexit Party MEP Martin Dewbs and co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. So, the Labour Party have stated that they may not be able to reverse certain benefit cuts and freezes due to dire economic inheritance. But isn't the Labour Party supposed to be a party of the left who believe in the welfare state and state intervention? Do we even have a left and a right wing in this country anymore? Martin, let me start with you. I think since spring 2020, the concept of left and right has become utterly meaningless.
We have a uni party. We've had no opposition since the beginning of lockdown, for certainly. When Liam Byrne left that famous note in 2010 saying, sorry, there's no money left, the country was £811 billion in debt. We're now 2.6 trillion in debt. Anybody who's naive enough to think that the Labour Party is considering coming in and start reversing bedroom taxes, handing out more benefits, the magic money tree has been burnt to the ground.
But that's suggesting, therefore, that the Conservatives have created a situation which has eroded left and right. So there's nothing that Labour can do to position themselves differently.
Well, in our darkest hour, during the first lockdowns, there was an opportunity for there to be an opposition. Say, hang on a minute, are we sure about printing 500 billion quid? Are we sure about paying people to not work? Are we sure about making children wear masks? All that stuff's been proven to be wrong with the benefit of hindsight, which you and I knew at the time, I think was complete and utter nonsense. There's no evidence. But they willed it along. The Labour Party wanted sooner, harder, faster lockdowns, more expensive, and now they're in a financial black hole. How do they get out of it? They can't tax more. We've already got the highest tax burden since World War II. The notion of wealth taxes, well, what do wealthy people do, thanks to globalism that Starmer likes? They just clear off abroad. And what we should be doing is generating wealth by drilling shale. But we can't do that because all of the parties are adhered to the Church of Net Zero. Open borders, we have that. Both parties basically are the same. They're the same party in different rosettes. And I think a lot of people who believe that, OK, it's time for a change, it's been 13 years, let's vote for a different rosette, it's going to be the same cheek of a different backside. And I think that's where we're heading. There's nothing between them. They both stand for the same stuff.
Can this all be led back, Aaron, traced back to the start of the COVID event? Because I feel before then there probably was a bit of difference between I felt very clear about what the Conservative Party stood for. They were lower taxation, they were smaller state, they were free enterprise, they were free market competition. The Labour Party, traditionally, higher taxes, bigger state. Suddenly, the government came in and became the biggest state. I mean, they were so big, they were literally around my Sunday lunch table telling me I couldn't see my mum. And now I don't know where we sit with left and right. Is there a difference?
Increasingly, I don't think there is. And I recall, in 2019, 2017, you had a profound, obvious difference between Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, massive differences. And the media was flipping out about it. The centrist establishment was so upset because the electorate had a choice. And I think we've now gone back to something which they wanted all along, which is basically a Conservative Party which doesn't conserve, a Liberal Democratic Party which is neither Liberal nor Democratic, and a Labour Party which is certainly not social democratic or socialist.
And they're all green.
Well, to an extent, I mean, they all have the same... I believe in having to address climate change, and I'm sure some people watching this will disagree, but I think you have to accept disagreement on how to get there is very useful. Like, so, for instance, I quite like the Green Party. I completely disagree with them on nuclear. I think you have to have nuclear if you want to decarbonise quickly. It's low carbon, and in the long term, it's very cheap. So I would agree it's a big problem we don't have more disagreement between them right now. And what I would say is on this particular policy of the kids and the two-child benefit on two-child cap on benefits. It costs 1.3 billion. 250,000 kids would be taken out of poverty if we did it. Now, people might say, waste of money. You could say that about 101 things. I generally think for the return on investment, that's extraordinary. Having 250,000 kids in poverty, long-term, is very expensive. It's very expensive from crime, from health. We want to be a high-productivity, high-output economy. Having that many kids in poverty doesn't help that.
So that's the point. Go on, Mark. I was going to say, but that's the point where they could be different, and they're choosing not to be.
Well, but therein lies the rub. It's like the Labour Party, the party I voted for 20 years, as a miners lad from Nottinghamshire, was the party of the working classes. The Labour Party now is the party of the middle classes and the benefits classes. Let's be frank, the working classes pay for it all. They bankroll it all and are expected to swallow.
Is it the party of the benefits? I mean, I just don't understand. Well, evidently...
Bigger state, more dependency is exactly what the left want.
Martin, evidently not, because they're saying they won't change something that was brought in by George Osborne.
Because at last they've realised that the biscuit tin is completely and utterly bare. It's 3 times worse than in 2010 when Labour gave the keys over.
There's always the money. Look, we found £2.3 billion for Ukraine last year. We can't find £1.3 billion for starving kids in this country.
I would agree that British kids starving is more important than giving money to Zelensky. On that, we can agree.
Great.
But that's not going to happen anytime soon. And we need to generate wealth.
But the money's there.
Generate wealth by, instead of spending 500 million quid on an electric battery factory, actually generate our own energy sovereignty. But you see, we can't because they're tied to net zero and the religion that will sink us. It's going to mire us in debt, funding inefficient energy that conks out when the wind drops and when it's too hot for solar panels.
And in a way, that's the one thing, actually, that maybe Starmer is different, because he would effectively not nationalise our energy, but he wants to create great British energy, doesn't he? An energy business that would sort of bring it all in. That's almost the one place. What about education? Anything that you see different? Because, of course, Sunak wants kids to stay at school and do maths until 18, went down very badly in my house with my teenagers. And Keir Starmer came out only last week and said, actually, I would like to introduce public speaking lessons into the classroom. I was like, finally, there's one thing that I can see that have a different image of the future. But, I mean, that is a very small concept of the curriculum. It's not visionary.
Well, he used this word oracy. oracy, which is a word that people use apparently in educational theory. And I thought, isn't it brilliant? You know, this London lawyer trying to talk to the British electorate using a word that
nobody understands.
I'm going to make you talk nice. I'm going to make you talk
exactly.
posh.
And what was funny for me was, you can imagine Boris Johnson saying, oh, we should teach your children rhetoric and logic in schools. The Guardian, the BBC, all hell would have broken loose. Keir Starmer was saying the same thing. He was just using a word that nobody's ever heard before.
But Starmer, nakedly this week, on the same stage as Tony Blair. It was basically left, 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 lose, 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 Blairism, win. He's a naked Blairite. You and I can both agree this is a bad direction. He's the turd that cannot be flushed. He's back. He's got his tendrils in the Labour Party. He's back.
The sequel.
Blair's back. He wants COVID
He
passports.
never went away.
He wants digital ID. He wants full state control.
He wants biometric
He wants
ID.
it all to be barcodes. Starmer is on a stage with him. He's in bed with him. We're going to get Blairism version 2, except we've got no money to spend on policies to get us out of this hole. Where's the money going to come from?
It's a terrifying vision of the future.
Well, Martin paints a very vivid picture. We're going to have Blairism without the economic growth, without the wage growth. It's going to be quite a harsh couple of years, I suspect. With regards to the Blair Institute, your audience is probably unaware of this. It has 850 global employees. Yeah. They have been funded by people such as the Saudis and the US State Department. And I find it extraordinary that potentially the next Prime Minister is sitting next to somebody saying, yep, I'll listen to what you're saying, yep, I'll listen to the Blair Institute. We are looking in real time at policy capture of a future British government by an organisation funded by overseas governments, including the Saudis. And yet nobody in the print media wants to talk about that. If that was Boris Johnson talking to a former Conservative Prime Minister who had their own think tank with 850 staff, with millions coming from overseas, you can bet your damnedest BBC, The Guardian, The World and its wife will be around there saying how corrupt it is. Why is this any different?
See, when you put it like that, because of course we think about Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt being the ultimate globalists. I do. I don't believe any of them will live out, either of them will live out their lives in this country. So I think they're sort of here for the fleeting, and perhaps they're well-intentioned, but you get the impression that this government is filling suitcases with cash before they all run out the door at some point next year. But when you hear that vision of what Keir Starmer's country would look like, that we would be this tiny pinprick on this globe. He's already said he'd rather be in Davos than Westminster.
Precisely.
I don't like that either.
No, and I think he's wearing the right clothing to fool people around things like Brexit. You know, he spent 3 years trying to cancel Brexit. He led the People's Vote referendum. Now he's draped in union flags. It's window dressing.
Yeah.
Behind the mask, he's a full-on WEF globalist.
Yeah.
Blair's in bed with him. Blair's got his fingers in every pie around the planet. That is a direction of travel. Those who want to stick up for national self-interests, they're getting their bank accounts closed. They can't even trade.
I take a big, heavy sigh at that point, because we've sort of concluded, haven't we, that neither of them...
They're all the same.
That Labour and the Conservatives are so similar, and it doesn't feel like they have the interests of this country in their hearts.
And it goes to when people talk about the centre. People hear about the centre all the time. The centre is apparently privatisation, deregulation, all these things. In fact, the public is to the left of the Labour Party on public services and to the right of the Conservative Party on immigration and law and order. That's the centre. But nobody wants to talk about that. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of that stuff because I'm not to the right of the Conservative on certain policies. Of course I'm not. But that's the real centre, but that's precisely the politics that you're not allowed to discuss in mainstream media at Westminster.
But also, across Europe, we're seeing a lunge to the right. We're seeing in Sweden, in Italy, in Spain, in the Netherlands, in Greece. People want self-protection. They want populism, that dirty word.
Yeah.
If only we had a Conservative government in this country, people would vote for it. We don't. We have a Conservative party that in all but name is the Labour Party.
Yeah. Right, thank you, gentlemen. OK, still to come this evening, are rural communities being left behind? Bus routes are closing. Broadband is still slow for many of you living in the countryside, and schools are, frankly, falling down. Let's discuss that. Don't go anywhere. This is GB News.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have seen a few showers around today, some of those on the heavier side, but increasingly into this evening they will be easing out for many of us, and actually many of us seeing some late evening sunshine. The showers persisting for the longest though across the far northeast of Scotland, particularly across Shetland, where it is going to remain rather cloudy overnight with a brisk breeze, but elsewhere some clear intervals, and that will allow temperatures to fall off a touch more compared to recent nights, even down into single figures, particularly in some rural areas. But those clear spells mean that we'll start off with a fairly decent amount of sunshine first thing on Thursday, but increasingly into the afternoon, once again, we will start to see those showers bubbling up. Some of those could also turn onto the heavier side once again. They will be fairly well scattered, so there'll be some decent sunny, bright intervals in between, and in that sunshine, temperatures climb to highs around 18 to 24 degrees Celsius, around where they should be for the time of year. Into Friday, we somewhat do it all over again. There will be some sunshine first thing. Showers perhaps confined to northern areas to begin with, but increasingly into the afternoon, there is the potential that they do start pushing their way down into eastern counties of Lincolnshire and East Anglia as well. Always Shetland seeing the breeziest conditions through Friday, but into the weekend, more of us are going to start to see our winds increase as this area of low pressure starts to spread its way in from the west, turning much more widely unsettled for many of us, with plenty of rain to come into the weekend. Otherwise, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Thank you for joining me. Bev Turner in for Michelle this evening. We've got Martin Daubney and Aaron Bastani with me. You've been getting in touch at home. Thank you very much. Wayne has said... we're going to talk about rural bus routes in a minute. That's what Wayne was talking about. General Ian has said, Martin is great. as usual.
Thank you very much.
But I'm constantly impressed with Aaron.
Yay.
Sorry, Martin, I gave with one hand and took away with the other. I might not agree with him on everything, but I really respect how he puts his views across. I'd like to see him on more. Well, that's nice, isn't it? And Chris has said your two current guests could really develop meaningful policies if you stuck them in an office together for a couple of weeks. They are refreshingly brilliant. Well, you never know who's watching this channel.
That's not a bad plan.
A couple of black eyes and a good manifesto. You know, I'd have a few teeth missing.
And Andrew said, I've got to say, the last 30 minutes has been riveting viewing. Well done to you and the panel. I've learned loads. Thank you, everybody. Well, hopefully the remainder of the show, 20 minutes, will be similarly riveting. We're going to talk about rural areas. You've already been getting in touch with this, about the fact that life in rural areas seems to be getting harder. And Wayne has said our rural bus route is terrible, yet the migrants in Portland, down in Dorset, where the Baby Stockholm arrived, of course, get a free bus service to the amenities. Gordon says, in my village, thousands of houses are being built in the area despite a poor country road network, no train services, and now only 4 local buses a day. Our nearest hospital is an hour's drive away and there is no bus service. Schools are full, dentists are full, doctors are full. The district and county councils only care about the money. Aaron, have we just allowed rural areas to slip into a gradual state of neglect and decline?
You just put it beautifully. I think that's, you know, I could just repeat those words. That's absolutely what's happened. With regards to buses, what's interesting is over the last 20 years, well, over the last 25 years, buses in London, people taking buses to travel, the number of journeys has massively increased. The rest of the country's gone down. So actually you've got a double dynamic here, which is the service for most of the country, the overwhelming majority of the country, is deteriorating, yet the policymakers, the opinion makers, media, politicians, they think, well, the buses are fantastic. I've got a bus coming every 2 minutes if I want to go to the Strand or to Aldwych or Peckham. That is not the service for the rest of the country. So it's actually even worse than what this story is conveying. So we have a problem, it's getting worse, and the people that can change it are the ones actually who are experiencing uniquely a very good bus service in London.
Are you urban living for you, Martin? I don't know where you live. No, you live out in Kent, don't you?
No, I live in South East London.
Right,
but
OK.
I'm a city lad. I'm born in Nottingham. But in terms of, like, the bus services, I've had terrible bus services for most of my sort of childhood, and that still exists in a lot of rural areas. It's interesting how the total allocated fund is 1.1 billion annually, which is exactly half of the amount we're spending on asylum seeker hotels. Just goes to show you that's where the priorities of this country are. The entire levelling up fund for the entire UK, the second wave last year, was 2.1 billion. So we're spending more on asylum seekers than we are on the entire UK levelling up, and double the amount we spend on rural buses. In a nutshell, that's the problem. We've totally lost sight of what matters. Rural areas have been taken for granted for decades because they tend to be more conservative. They take their votes for granted. They've had a rude awakening in North Shropshire last year and in Tiverton. And I think those rural areas now, they're typically older. They're turning to their cars. There's 44% decrease in bus journeys since lockdown. Oh, I wonder why elderly people who tend to live in the countryside don't want to get on a bus where we've been told by the government for the last 2 years we might die.
Yeah.
Do you know, everything has a consequence.
I know.
And it's short-sighted policy, funding in the wrong place. I think there's going to be a rude, massive political awakening for the Tories when we go to the next general election in these precise areas. We've been taken for granted for years. And what we could do is scrap idiotic white elephants like the £100 billion HS2 and actually spend it in communities where they need it, where they're on their knees and they're forced into cars, which increasingly are going to get taxed off the road by net zero, and the war on the motorists to rip away money to get to the exchequer is forcing people to take expensive journeys, and they don't want to get on public transport. It's unreliable, crowded, and they've been told could kill them.
Well, Aaron, what do we do with our bus service? Is it the kind of thing that you would want to see brought back into public ownership, do you think?
100%. 100%. You know, I'm from Bournemouth, and we used to have what's called the Yellow Bus Company. Anybody who's been, you know, holiday in Bournemouth, seaside, there were these quite iconic yellow buses. We had yellow cabs too. My dad's a cab driver in Bournemouth, a licensed cab driver. They used to be yellow as well. The yellow cabs are going. The Yellow Bus Company went into administration. And I just think it's really sad that what makes towns and places unique across this country, stuff like that, are disappearing. And Bournemouth was a really wonderful place when I was growing up, and it had lots of sort of idiosyncrasies like these yellow buses, yet they're going. And I think there is something there politically which says we want to offer places a unique identity, but also things that matter, like bus services, are in the hands of local people. So I think there's the argument, particularly on buses, for what I would call common sense socialism.
Yeah.
Yeah, but common sense socialism is very expensive because undoubtedly this would be a huge loss leader. Because I mean, if no private company has managed to have a single profitable network in Britain. The train networks are basically 62% funded by the state. They're already basically part privatised, part nationalised. Sorry. So the notion that we should have this kind of Futurama style state where everyone gets free transport is great. It's for the birds.
I'll respond to that. We subsidise rail companies more now that they're quote-unquote privatised, more than we did when they were in public ownership. This is a very stupid way of administering a rail system. So you can make the argument it should be entirely in private hands. So in Japan, they have trains in private ownership, but the private companies can use the land around stations to develop and make money to provide better services. Or you can argue something different. I think when it's water, when it's rail, when it's mail, I genuinely think in Britain we have the worst of all worlds.
We do have the worst of all worlds, but I'm not sure that nationalising them is going to be the solution. I think, like, you hit the nail on the head there, Martin, when you said, like, these decisions have implications.
Yeah.
And somehow nobody thinks through. And what I keep seeing so much at the moment is how the elderly are so disadvantaged by so many social changes now. And if you lose bus routes in the countryside, that is the difference between that old lady being able to go into the village that day, I would say visit the bank, but the banks are gone, visit the post office, but the post office is gone, go and buy a cup of tea in the shop, but she needs a card to do that, and she might only have cash. And so people are being encouraged, sadly, to live these smaller, more isolated, depressing lives.
Yeah, and there's a convergence of new tech, impacting older people the hardest in a very short period of time, and that kind of social change is scary. And as a consequence, when people are scared, they tend to retreat into what they know and into their bunkers. And that's a terribly sad thing. People are driving around in their cars more often, and we have this love-hate relationship with cars. People love them, the state hates them. And as a consequence, we're not getting anywhere, because I don't agree that we should be pumping billions of pounds into bus services that people aren't just using. They're working from home, they're using bus services less. We should actually stop the war on the motorist.
Yeah. Right, thanks, guys. We're going to take another quick break, but coming up in just a moment, low-quality apprenticeships are apparently rife. And are some companies using apprenticeships as just cheap labour? This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me this evening, Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us. Now, 47% of all apprentices dropped out of their courses last year. So it's ridiculous, really, isn't it? And nearly half aren't finishing them. They were blaming career prospects and poor pay as just some of the reasons, but there's clearly a problem here, and we should be, shouldn't we, investing in vocational skills. Let's have a listen to what Rishi Sunak has said on this topic.
Now, for many people, university is the right answer and it does brilliantly. But actually, there are a range of people who are being let down by the current system. They're being taken advantage of with low-quality courses that don't lead to a job that it makes it worth it, leaves them financially worse off. That's what we're clamping down on today. But at the same time, making sure that young people have a range of fantastic alternative opportunities, whether that be apprentices or higher technical qualifications, for example. So the key message is, look, you don't have to go to university to succeed in life. There are a range of fantastic options, and that's what we're delivering.
It's a big change, that, Martin, isn't it? To hear the Prime Minister say, you don't all have to go to university. It's one thing that is different from Tony Blair, was trying to pretty much get everybody up there. But is he right?
I think he is right. Certainly, when you look at the demographics, I'm a white working-class lad. I'm the least likely demographic now of all in Britain to go to university. And that
Did you go?
I did. I was the first lad in my family to go, and I've repaid that investment many, many times. But I went because back in my day, show my age, I got a full grant. Yeah. So the prospect of somebody who's not trained in how to handle money, £50,000 in debt, is scary.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of working class people are equipped to take that sort of thing on. An apprenticeship scheme, however, that was ran by the government. And by the way, the government needs to step in because big business won't do it. Guess why? They're addicted to cheap labour from overseas. Precisely, we saw this week the government crying out for more visa withdrawals for bricklayers, for plasterers. You know, back in the day, Bev, before the Brexit referendum even became a thing, I was on Sky News all the time. They're saying that tradesmen contacted me all the time saying I'm dropping out because I can't compete with the Polish lads, with the Latvians, all the ones who are coming over, and they were undercutting them, and so we lost a whole generation of tradesmen, and they were never replaced with schemes because big business wants to pay below British market rate. It used to be a position of the political left to pay British workers a higher wage. Those days are gone. We'd rather pay an Albanian or a Latvian below our rate, and that's what's keeping them hooked on this cheap source of labour.
How will we ever, though, Aaron, how will we ever get the next generation of tradesmen? I am going to say men, because it is predominantly men, but of course there are some fantastic female electricians, plumbers, etc. But it really is those old-fashioned blokey occupations just not appealing anymore to teens, to British teens. How do we get them back into it?
They earn a lot more money than graduates as well in the long term. And I think there's a very strange period for an apprentice. From 16 to 18, the minimum wage is, I think, £5.28.
Yeah.
Now, in the long term, it makes economic sense to do it. You'll do really well. You'll earn a great living for decades. But a 16-year-old doesn't think like that. No. They say, well, I can go down the supermarket where I earn £11 an hour, or I can go to university and I can get a massive loan and I can access, cheap credit and pay back those £9,000 fees in 20 years' time or whatever. What we need to do, I think, is raise apprentices' minimum wages to the level of the regular minimum wage.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's a very simple thing to do, and that would solve so many problems.
Supplemented by the government.
Well, here's the question. So how do we do it, right? Because big business isn't going to want to do that.
No.
I think you're probably going to have a mix where the government puts in a little bit, you're going to have to ask more of businesses, and maybe you have a situation where you say, when you're an apprentice, 16 to 18, you can access a very low interest rate, £5 loan. We do that for students. Why don't we do it for electricians, plumbers and
This is what you were
bricklayers?
talking about. See, we could come up with a great policy together for this. I'd go further and I would mandate a percentage of British workers that had to be taken on by companies, as in domestic, I don't mean white people, I mean domestically trained British-born workers, say to companies, you should take on 20%, and the government should subsidise their training, and that's a huge and fantastic investment in young people that we should be doing more of. They will pay back. Look, Rishi's obsessed with AI. He knows AI can't lay bricks. AI can't plaster walls. We need electricians, we need sparkies, we need plasterers more than ever, and we shouldn't be importing them. We should be training our own young people.
What do you think? So do you think that's really what he was getting at there in code? Why doesn't he just come out and say that? Why doesn't he come out and say, look, we've got this AI revolution, we're in the middle of the Great Reset, we're going to all need different jobs in the future. You need to go for these sorts of trades. Why won't he be as explicit as that, Martin?
In the same reason, he says we need to have a war on Mickey Mouse degrees, low-value degrees. What he means is we need to stop issuing 400,000 foreign visa students per year, but I can't say that because it'd be racist. What he does, he dresses it up in a clever way, but the root of the problem is we have too many people coming from overseas to study. We have too many people coming overseas to take these professions, the vocations, the historic working-class professions, proud, noble professions. And actually, I think Rishi, even though he's having a lot of choppy waters recently, he's on the right track.
Yeah, you know what? Derek has got in touch and he said, why did apprenticeships become unpopular? Because it became uncool and demeaning to be seen working in a jacket and overalls. And the government made it exceedingly difficult for small businesses or single tradespersons to take on apprentices. There is a point, isn't there, Aaron, just briefly, about the fact that it's not cool for kids. Like, they see Instagram, they see the rappers, they see these big... We've run out of time, Aaron. I'll leave you thinking about rappers.
I think it is cool. How about that?
80 grand a year is very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah,
That's what plumbers
absolutely. Lots of you have been getting in touch as well, showing your support.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have seen a few showers around today, some of those on the heavier side, but increasingly into this evening they will be easing out for many of us, and actually many of us seeing some late evening sunshine. The showers persisting for the longest though across the far northeast of Scotland, particularly across Shetland, where it is going to remain rather cloudy overnight with a brisk breeze, but elsewhere some clear intervals, and that will allow temperatures to fall off a touch more compared to recent nights, even down into single figures, particularly in some rural areas. But those clear spells mean that we'll start off with a fairly decent amount of sunshine first thing on Thursday, but increasingly into the afternoon, once again, we will start to see those showers bubbling up. Some of those could also turn onto the heavier side once again. They will be fairly well scattered, so there'll be some decent sunny, bright intervals in between, and in that sunshine, temperatures climb to highs around 18 to 24 degrees Celsius, around where they should be for the time of year. Into Friday, we somewhat do it all over again. There will be some sunshine first thing. Showers perhaps confined to northern areas to begin with, but increasingly into the afternoon, there is the potential that they do start pushing their way down into eastern counties of Lincolnshire and East Anglia as well. Always Shetland seeing the breeziest conditions through Friday, but into the weekend, more of us are going to start to see our winds increase as this area of low pressure starts to spread its way in from the west, turning much more widely unsettled for many of us, with plenty of rain to come into the weekend. Otherwise, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising.